as we took in the Super Bowl yesterday, right? We saw the NFL position itself to be in the good graces of many people. My wife, who does not watch football, said, "Why do they even end racism painting in the back of the end zone?" Obviously, we've covered that many times. She has obviously seen a bunch of my work, as have many other people, so we all know that that's ridiculous. One thing that I wanted to touch on with you was the Pat Tillman Award. So we continue seeing this, right, from the NFL over and over and over again with Pat Tillman, his foundation, and the NFL basically saying in very condensed form that he joined the ranks of the military after 9/11, felt like it was his duty, and he died in the line of duty. You are someone that has interviewed Tillman family members. You have covered this for years. What was your overall thought with the way the NFL positioned this and angled it to the football fan that's watching on Super Bowl Sunday?
Yeah, first and foremost, absolutely. This is a story that has been just part of my DNA for the last 15 years. As soon as Pat Tillman was killed, I received a phone call from somebody who, when I say as soon as, I mean day of, the news came out. A friend of mine who I didn't know was a high school classmate of Pat Tillman. And the story he told me about who Pat Tillman was in high school was so at odds with the kind of NFL G.I. Joe thing that we had been fed. And that's really what started me on this story before we knew that there was a cover up, before we knew that Tillman died in an instance of friendly fire, before we had questions about how friendly that fire was, before any of these things. Before we found out about Pat Tillman's politics, that he thought the war in Iraq was illegal, before we found out he was reading Noam Chomsky, before we found out he was reading a lot of people from all over the political spectrum, because he was a curious person. And if you're a curious person, the war in Iraq isn't going to look too good, especially if you're on the front lines. So before all of that, like I'm honed in on this because he just seems so incredibly fascinating and paradoxical in so many ways. But just it was really interesting to hear what he was like in high school. Just free spirit, friends with all the kids, long hair, cliff diver. I mean, not what you usually hear about people who end up in the National Football League in terms of his desire to like experience the world in a way that was far more expansive than just the football field. Which is probably why he was drafted low and had to work his way through the NFL to all-pro status. But that's a really long intro to say that, yeah, I thought it was repugnant what they trotted out for some of the reasons that I just gave. I mean, the NFL has a lot of political power, a lot of political sway. The NFL has never said anything about helping the family get the truth that they've so doggedly pursued about Pat. They've never spoken publicly in support of them in that effort. They've chosen instead to support the foundation, and good for the Pat Tillman Foundation. They do amazing work. It's just to the NFL to drape itself in Pat's memory. From what I know about Pat, it would have made him pretty sick. So to see them treat him in death in a way that he would never like them to treat him in life is just a little hard to take.
I'm just curious from your perspective. There is a correct way to do this, I suppose. The problem is the story is so detailed. It is so long. There are so many major players. I'm not necessarily. First off, I will never absolve the NFL of anything. But what would have been the correct way of going about this? Because I have my criticisms, you have your criticisms. Many people on Twitter had their criticisms. Many media members had their criticisms as well. Would it be to not do it at all, or would it be for the NFL to just go, full 180 and say he died from friendly fire? Like, would that even be a start?
Well, the bigger issue is that they missed their moment. I mean, it's now been an incredible amount of time, 15 plus years. It's the family is not in the throes of trying to figure out what happened. John McCain is not um alive. I mean,
Right.
this was something that he was looking into, although his contact with the family became sporadic after a while. That's another twist and turn to this story. Because I'm not going to play Saint McCain when it comes to the Pat Tillman story, because
Hmm.
that's just raw. That's historically inaccurate. But it's to say that that moment is past, in terms of what they could have done that would have been actually constructive. What they can do now is to just tell the truth, I think. And I think starting by saying that Pat Tillman died in friendly fire. Um, I think that to say
My
that,
brain's
I
still in
think, is
recovery
to
mode from
say
taking in
something that's
some incredibly
inherently
important ideas.
critical of the armed forces. But the guy died at the hands of our own armed forces. So, yeah, maybe there is room to be critical in this instance. So for people who think that like the military are such snowflakes that they wouldn't be able to handle the criticism. I mean the right wing peals of outrage would be an unholy din. But to me, this isn't about right or left as much as it's about um, giving someone the dignity of the truth.
From what I understand, there was much communication going on when Pat Tillman passed from friendly fire. There were, and of course, for those who don't know, it occurred in Afghanistan in 2004. Um, there was much communication. There was communication with everybody but the family. It looked like.
Yeah.
Um, have you had any conversations? Well, let me ask you this: when was the last time you spoke with the Tillmans?
In the last 6 months, I spoke to Mary.
Okay. And
That's
look, obviously you are completely changed through tragedy, and the trials and tribulations of life. What do you think they are feeling as they see this portrayal, poor portrayal at that, being put out by the National Football League?
yeah. I couldn't speak for them. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. I do want to reach out to them though and ask that very question. And I can say that not everyone in the family thinks the same about all of these things. So it's not even that there's a Tillman family view about how this stuff should be told and processed and retold. But I will say that there are people in the family who think the myth making does Pat a disservice. And I think those are the voices that we should be listening to.
Hmm. Um, when I put out a detailed piece about what occurred with Pat today, again, the story is very long
Mm.
of when he started out playing football, Northern California kid, the California hair, and then going to Arizona State, being injured, coming back, playing for the Arizona Cardinals. The one fact that it seems like everybody brings up is to play into this notion of his utter patriotism was that he gave up a huge salary in order to go join the ranks and fight for what he believed was right. But then while he was in Afghanistan, he says and turns to one of his platoon mates and said, "This is effing illegal. This is effing illegal. What's going on?" I'm just curious in your work that you have seen. Um, do you think anybody from, you know, Crystal, obviously Rumsfeld is passed too, but anybody from that Bush era, um, how many have actually owned it? How many have actually said that this was wrong that happened without blaming another person who might have been higher or below them in rank?
Ah, I mean, I think that there have been, wow. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what I can say or can't say or what I should say or shouldn't say. I'll just say that I don't think there have been any public apologies made to the Tillman family.
Hmm. from the military, of course.
Yeah, from
Hmm.
the people who should be apologizing.
Of course. Um, one angle that I saw as well was this was a very difficult time for the Bush administration when Pat Tillman
Mm.
was killed from friendly fire. There was everything that was going down in Abu Ghraib. There was the terrorizing of political prisoners, and they wanted to, correct me if I'm wrong, play up this narrative of someone who's selfless, also a football player, a professional football player, losing his life for the betterment of the country. Just paint the picture for us. How in the tube were the Bush approval ratings during this time when all of this went down?
Oh, I mean, you just laid out the background very well, from Abu Ghraib to the various scandals emanating from that, to low popularity uh, for the war itself, a very divided Congress, very divided public, the hugest demonstrations in world history coming off that previous year. So a lot of domestic uncertainty, political uncertainty for this international slash imperial conflict. And from my reporting at the time, there was this desire by the Pentagon, by Rumsfeld, to really, use Pat Tillman as a kind of NFL GI Joe, putting him on recruitment posters, because that was the other issue at the time too, which we have to mention, is there was a crisis of recruitment numbers,
Mm-hmm.
because as one what might imagine there would be, and there was a movement in this country to remove military recruiters from campuses. So this was an inflection point for the entire war, and so Pat Tillman looked like manna from heaven for these DoD ghouls. And what they found out, though, was that Pat Tillman would refuse to be used in any such a way, any promotional stuff. He really wanted to be just another guy doing this. And from what I've heard, and I've interviewed people who served with him, um, yeah, the only thing that made him maybe not like every other guy, other than who he was that he really made an effort to be friends with everybody and talk to everybody, from the conscientious objector who's in the platoon to the most right wing folks. I mean, he was there to talk to everyone and be there for everyone.
What would have been the news you believe if it was reported accurately and factually at the time of Pat Tillman's passing?
I mean, it's not dissimilar to how the NFL operates. I mean, in that when you have crisis, what you do is you don't address the crisis, you attempt to spin it into a feel good narrative. So all of a sudden, the NFL is, a force against race norming. We look forward to leading the way.
Right.
Or, Damar Hamlin. All right, this is a story of perseverance and courage, which can only be forged through NFL football. I mean, in this case, it was like, okay, Pat Tillman, the most famous enlisted soldier, has been killed by his own troops. That's really tough to spin, even by the best of spin meisters. But if you take him being killed as a sacrifice, if he was killed by an enemy whom we already are supposed to hate, but let's stoke that hatred a little bit more, then it becomes a different kind of narrative. And so I think there was clearly a desperation by the Bush administration, by the Pentagon, to portray one narrative and not reveal another. And it's interesting. Like, you go back and you look at the comments by George W. Bush. He takes such great care to not say the whole thing about he was killed by an enemy. Like, it's almost like, so there will be deniability or no future clips or anything that could be used against him. But like, he's very slick, or at least the writers of his speeches were very slick when it came to Pat.
So you're saying in every press conference he gave, every interview he gave, he left it sort of vague? Is that what you're saying?
He left it at, like, Pat Tillman is one of the fallen, at the greatest sacrifice. Um,
Mm-hmm.
things, you know what I'm saying? Like ways of saying it that weren't, he was killed by the Taliban.
Mm-hmm. Which is, of course, what they told everyone in the States
Yeah,
initially.
no,
Uh,
exactly.
so, it's been many years now. Um, and I don't know, again, if you're allowed to talk about this, but I've seen conflicting reports of if Defense Secretary Rumsfeld knew or didn't know. I have seen many saying there's no way in hell he didn't know.
Hmm.
Could you share if he did know?
I mean, I've always fallen on the there's no way in hell he couldn't have known. I mean, he was his Pentagon, his Department of Defense, I mean, was one that was highly centralized and controlled in a deeply dictatorial fashion. The idea that he wouldn't, not only, and he also was a gossip, like a lot of these DC lifers are. And the idea that he not only didn't know, but wouldn't crave to know every last detail of this is utterly absurd.
Mm-hmm. A gossiper, how?
Oh my God, like the people who've been in and out of administrations and they act like they hate each other on Sunday TV, that they're up in Georgetown, like having, whatever they, whatever hors d'oeuvre, stem cells, I don't know, whatever it is they eat there. And, and talk about what the next conflict is going to be for our popular consumption. And, so that I don't quite know if that answers the question exactly, but what it is it's a gossip town. I mean, that's what J. Edgar Hoover understood before everybody, was like the power is in information and the power in this town is in gossip, because it's
Mm-hmm.
how the powerful get rearranged. Like, as in any royal court. I mean, how different are we really than pre-revolutionary France?
Right. So as you reflect now, after watching what happened on Super Bowl Sunday, seeing not only just then, but also throughout your career of uh, dutifully and also incredibly well done covering the intersection of sports and politics, I'm just curious. Has it gotten worse? Would you say from the McCain Flake oversight investigation to modern day prior to, has it only gotten worse, the promotion of the military industrial complex and saying we want to keep politics out of sports while doing everything they can to keep whatever they believe framed to their positive narrative of it in?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, they've gotten far more savvy about it. And I thought the NFL's coverage of the Super Bowl, at least presented some of that savviness, where it's like they realize they can't just be this militarized right wing machine. They can't just do that, otherwise they will lose a generation
Right.
of fans, like younger people who want no part of that BS. But then they also can't disavow the backbone of fans who are already there, who are middle-aged, older, white, conservative, etc. So they're now really trying to be all things to all people. And you saw that in some of, like, the reactions on Twitter, like some of the especially hard right political people were like, "Oh, I love Chris Stapleton singing the national anthem. I didn't like the woke stuff."
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I'm not saying who said it because I don't believe in giving these dumbasses any more oxygen. But so that's a recognition that the NFL is now trying to, both. I mean, this obviously comes out of the Kaepernick protests and then the protests following the police murder of George Floyd, like this effort to take whatever activism is out there among their fans and their players and try to ingest it so it just becomes part of the Borg,
Right.
um, instead of something that once existed in clear and precise and sharp opposition to the NFL, then just becomes part of its messaging, to the point of which we're going to have a Damar Hamlin Courage Award within a year, I bet.
Without question.
Yeah.
I believe so. Here's my last question for you.
They have a
Go for
Colin
it.
Kaepernick Social Justice Award. We'll see.
Wouldn't surprise me. Nothing Roger Goodell does surprises me.
No, no, and it's all about taking the horrors of this league and spinning them into feel-good narratives.